Hello and welcome to JavaScript Jam. Today I'm really excited to have Alex Russel and Frances Berriman. They invented and coined the term PWA or Progressive Web App. Alex is well known as formerly a member of the Chrome team, now Microsoft and the Edge team. Frances has worked at a lot of really great companies in the technology industry, including Netlify and many others. And I'm really excited to have the conversation today about the future of PWAs. So why don't we start out, Alex and Frances, why don't you give us just a brief background on yourselves for the audience if they haven't heard of you?
After you, Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Russell. I'm a program manager on the Edge team at Microsoft, and I'm relatively new to the Edge team, but I'm still working in the Chromium code base, where I am a blank API owner, the kind of small group that approves changes to the web platform. And prior to joining Microsoft, I was the tech lead for something called Project Fugu, and before that, I worked on standards and lots of other stuff to try to extend the web platform.
Yeah, I'm Frances. Thanks for having me. I'm a freelance product and technology consultant. I do a variety of different things. Sometimes my work is with public sector organizations like governments around the world, but I also do some private sector work. Before I sort of branched off into sort of doing my own thing, I was head of product for Netlify, and I kind of ended up there because I was a front-end engineer and a JavaScript engineer, so I sort of have a natural affinity for the trials and tribulations of a front-end engineer, and Netlify solves a lot of that. So yeah, thank you for having me, and for Alex.
Yeah, I mean, it's great because, well, you're a husband-wife team, and one of you works on the guts of the engine, and the other one has the experience from the perspective of the front-end engineer.
Right.
So a really great, powerhouse team. Take us back to 2015. You guys coined the term progressive web apps or PWAs. Tell us the origin story, just on how that came about.
I mean, Alex has told us before, but I think, there's probably some context to set. Like, I had just come off a long-term project working heavily in the government space. So, looking at how to give people equitable access to government services. And Alex was also sort of deep in the trenches of browser standards. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a conference talk that originally inspired us, I think.
Yeah.
I actually found the notebook, but go ahead, Alex. Say some of that.
So back in 2012, Andrew Betts had put together this little conference of people who were talking about why app cache wasn't enough to really make good offline competitive web experiences. And out of that spun service worker work. And that was pretty straightforward to spin up, just technically speaking, because it didn't involve any new UI. And moving UI inside of the Chrome team, like if there's ever a Sisyphean task, it's changing a pixel in the Omnibox. So
Interesting.
Yeah. So we couldn't really go try to build a real application platform head on. We kind of had to smuggle the piano into the concert hall one key at a time. And replacing app cache with something better was the start of that. And so by 2015, the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, we had launched kind of all the stuff. We'd launched installation, we'd launched push notifications, we'd launched service workers. We had a whole pile of follow-on features either in the works or coming soon to improve the kind of competitiveness of web experiences. But it didn't have a name. And so we launched all this stuff and we called it so I kept being in meetings saying installable web apps or add to home screen applications or that kind of thing. And we kept having repeat this over and over and over again and then try to explain what they were and how you got them and what it is. And my hope, my super naive hope had been that some maybe enterprising product manager would see this huge space and be like, aha, we can name it.
Or at least get sick of talking about it in such long-winded terms.
Exactly, right. Because, I'm certainly not the person you call for an end user brand, let alone a developer brand.
Oh God, no.
Never let me name anything. Is a good rule of thumb. And so we got to the middle of the year, and John Alsop had invited me down to Web Directions Code in Australia, and I was like, okay, what am I going to? I want to talk about this stuff, but it clearly needs a name, and it's gone 6 months. We don't have a name for it. We should sit down and do it. So we went out to dinner at one of our favorite Japanese restaurants. now sadly a pandemic casualty. Yeah. And I think we used one of your notepads, Frances, to just
I actually went and found it because I was like, I wonder what we wrote in there. I went and found it.
What was on the cutting room floor? Like, what were the other names?
Yeah.
And I'm really curious because personally, I will tell you, as an engineer, I think it's a descriptive name. But when I think about like the product marketing side of me, it's like, I don't think like the general public, it's a name they can get around. So,
right.
Yeah.
And it was never intended to be a general public marketing name. It wasn't supposed to be. I mean, I'm trying to think of a good example of something that is a general public name to do with technology that's similar. And there aren't many. We talk about apps generally, but that's about it. Apps and websites. We knew that we wanted to find some way to like talk about this stuff in a shorthand way, and also like give those folks that were already building, really exciting web experiences some sort of sense of community and direction, and like a place to be and talk about these things. So we went to dinner, and I being the pushy product person I am, I'm like, Alex, tell me some keywords. Like, when you talk about this, what are you talking about? So we ended up like writing down like a bunch of things that we think are important about this kind of strategy. Do you want to know some of the names we rejected, Alex? Because I'd forgotten these.
My memory is like gnat-like. So.
we had high fidelity web apps for a while, real catchy. We wrote a lot about Slice. Do you remember Slice? Yeah.
What is Slice?
It's an acronym that was sort of bouncing around the Chrome team's sort of like upper echelons. Stands for what's the S? Secure, linkable, indexable, and what's the?
I don't remember what the C is.
Ephemeral is the E.
Anyway, and then we also looked at for a brief while it was I nixed this pretty quickly, but it was PWA. So you would have had like power apps, and the marketing for that was just so gross. I couldn't, in any good conscience, allow Alex to go out into the world using that.
I actually, that's my favorite.
Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, it's like the thing with like branding like this, branding, marketing, is like it kind of doesn't matter what it's called because it's sort of going to stick once it gets out into the world.
Yes.
But while we had the opportunity to decide things, we kind of wanted to make each word in the name have like carry some weight. Like it had to mean something. So apps was like directly in competition to native apps. We knew we wanted to like say we are a one-on-one. The web was obviously a no-brainer, and that's why it was almost open web, but that was a no-brainer. And then progressive was like the real aha moment for us because we knew we wanted to speak to people who had been building really good web experiences in the previous decade or two. Like they already had that kind of like experience of building in an incremental way that would fall back gracefully and all these sorts of features. So we knew we wanted to speak to those people and say, you're already building brilliant things, but if you progressively added some of these extra features, you can start competing in the same space as native apps.
Interesting. There's that old saying that there's only two hard problems in computer science, right? And
the name doesn't really matter.
Naming things, caching, and off by one errors. And working on the guts of what's effectively sometimes a CDN, we sometimes joke that we deal with all three. But beyond the name, I'm sure other folks had similar ideas. Why do you think your definition and term struck? And do you feel like the definition has been durable? And how do you define a PWA? Let me pause there.
Alex, what do you think?
Well, on the definition part, I'm pulling up a blog post I wrote to to enunciate exactly that, because a lot of people I think get flummoxed by the progressive part of it, right? So it is the case that you can make something that has a manifest but doesn't have a service worker, and a lot of folks kind of I think want to admit that class of experiences into the clubhouse. Like they definitely want to open it up a little bit more broadly and have this kind of shortcut based easy OS level access back to the stuff that has that has kind of not just a manifest, but a manifest and some good descriptive stuff. And I understand that instinct, right? It is to say it's much lower work. It's a much smaller pile of effort to not have to reconsider what it means to build for people who are occasionally connected on a flaky network and instead just provide a link back to a regular website. but the design for the constraints that I put together for PWAs, the definition technically that we've kind of rebuilt into things like Lighthouse now, where if you pass all the tests, you kind of get that thing. All of that definitional work comes from working backwards from the end user experience. Because like when we were talking about this over dinner, what we were trying to capture was the idea that this is a pile of technology that meets the minimum specifications for what it is for something to feel like an app. And the way I kind of describe this sort of, more experientially is like, when I double click an app icon or tap on an app icon on a home screen, it never fails to launch. Maybe it doesn't tell me anything. Like maybe it doesn't actually work offline, but it's the application's fault that it didn't put some UI up that works offline. It's not the platform's fault that doesn't work. And that was informed by experiences that we had, going back to the Chrome apps days, where, like my web platform maximalist, my inner web platform maximalist was a little bit disappointed that Chrome apps couldn't just be web apps because we didn't have all this good technology to help you package stuff up and bundle it. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that happened was there was an iteration of Chrome apps called Chrome Apps V2, and they had this idea of we called them a shortcut app, which was literally that. It was like just a thing you could install that was a link to a website, and the feedback was overwhelming, which is that users said, well, this is just a link to a website. Right? And so captured in the essence of that is a real description of an end user problem, which is this thing does not feel like it's doing something that is, that gets it into the pantheon of things that might be worth an install, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. You have to give somebody a reason to dedicate the space of installing it, and so to make that commitment. Yeah,
there's a long-term quality thing about these things should not fail in that way. That is a hard technical thing to achieve. And we put the technology in the platform, and the PWA definition is all around making sure that you actually have the pieces in place in your site to meet that minimum bar.
So, and I think one of the undercurrents here is back, 2015. I feel like there was is the web dead, compared to native apps? Reactionary, no, the web can compete, but there's a user expectation that has now been carried over on this device. And if the web is going to compete with it, we need to match those expectations. I mean, is that also implicit? Am I remembering?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. In terms of user experience, a lot of native apps, especially around 2015, were simply better. It was a better experience in a lot of cases. Partly through choice by the companies themselves. There was, we're still seeing it now, but a lot of websites would say, we're just not offering you anything online on our website. You must download the app. So we were seeing a bit of that as a choice, but also I don't think people were able to build the things they wanted to build on the web. So the native was the obvious way to do it. Plus discoverability was kind of broken. If you wanted to have the shiny good experience, the App Store was the way you found that. And we needed to find a way to get websites into that location too. So I think native has set the expectations a lot higher. And I think that's okay. I know there's, I think Alex and I occasionally call them the web Amish, who maybe believe that the web was fine 10, 15 years ago and we should have stopped there. But that's not the reality. The web is expected to do a lot more now. The native has set those standards.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. I don't think people, even developers, understand the undercurrents and the standards that you guys have a front row seat to. They're, with the W3C, and I don't even know how it's pronounced, the WhatWig group, that was really this debate between the document web versus the app web, and even predates, some of this. Maybe you want to give folks a little context on that.
Oh gosh, where to start?
Where would you start, Frances?
Where would I start?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, this feels like we should be sat by a fireplace with a whiskey talking about the old days of web standards. I don't know how far back to start. There is definitely a worldview that the web was built to do something very different, and it doesn't include the kind of rich applications that we see on the web today. There is a certain, and I can totally understand why, but there is a certain feeling of trying to get the square peg into the round hole, whichever way around that saying goes, to make the web be what it isn't, and that the native experience is better because it is fundamentally built to provide those experiences. I think that would be a massive shame if that's how we viewed our access to information and tools. The open web is pretty much the only thing like it that we have today. Tell me another media platform that gives us the opportunity and freedom of expression, and I can't foresee another one coming anytime soon. So if it means that we need to keep up technologically with the things that people need, I think that's fine. I don't really have a problem with that. But yeah, there is definitely a strong current of the web was designed for documents and we should have stopped there.
Yeah, it's Alex, you want to take us through this diagram from your
just
blog?
put a diagram up.
Yeah, so I've been drawing, this and another diagram that I'll send around in just a second maybe, on whiteboards for a long time to try to explain to people who are slightly unsettled by the idea that the web needs to grow all this new stuff. A mental model for what the web's role in computing actually is. And so, I think you could focus very closely on that kind of like, internecine debate or war in some cases between the various parties who decide to show up at a standards body. And there's a lot to talk about there, and a lot of it is, unfortunately exciting. But very little, like the question is kind of like, does it matter, right? Like you could have these debates endlessly about like, it's almost as relevant as like, which Linux package manager do you use at some level? Like it doesn't matter unless it matters, in which case it really matters. And so what differentiates those two environments? And I think the answer is whether or not your platform is a credible alternative for developers. That is to say, like, is it relevant in the choice space that a product team popping up for air after some sprint or after some big long arc comes up and says, okay, I want to build this new product, I want to build this new service, I want to think about what I'm going to do next. They view the if you start at the left hand side, like maybe at time zero they will have viewed the web or meta platform like Flash or some other platform as being a great choice. It covers almost everything they want to do. It's got really broad reach, and if most operating systems and most hardware can do it, so can this meta platform. And that means that the price of addressing those users is much lower than having to build something specialized in order to reach into that single OS or single hardware capability part of the capability spectrum. I kept getting questions for the longest time about like, okay, when is Project Foo going to add touch bar support? And like, I have a design in mind for how we would do that, but my basic answer was always, well, it's really only on a single piece of hardware and on a single OS. And so like that kind of just doesn't fit the bill for stuff that the web should probably think about going and like really commoditizing. And the web's role is to take these things that are commodity, USB ports, the fact of like laying out text on a screen and maybe displaying a video and all the stuff that like every operating system and most hardware can do, and turn it into something that isn't sort of incidentally proprietary for the long haul, right? Like our economic role is to set the price of a feature actually down to zero. Standards and open source and interoperability are the ways that we do that, but the job to be done here is to drop the price in practice of things that are commodity in theory, all the way down to zero. And the extent to which your platform is relevant is the extent to which you do enough of those things all at once that people can bet on you in the future. There's a bad version of this where like you see that straight line like time, like you don't actually add anything for a while. If you never actually catch up to where the commodity hardware or the commodity operating systems have met over time, like it is the case that computers add more stuff over time, right? Like it used to be weird that we would all have a camera on our computers, right? Like you used to have like buy an add-on to add a camera to a computer. Now you can basically not buy one without it. Microphones, 3D graphics hardware, all this stuff. So as that set of commodity things grows, your platform has to grow with it. Otherwise, you stop being relevant, and that relevance gap can grow without space. And so a team that comes up in sort of in the middle of that graph and looks around, that's a little bit of a worry. And so if you don't have that catch-up moment, like you're not going to continue to be there. So, it could be the case that we never catch up. back to where the current moment is, and then we're in a really bad space, and it means that your platform is no longer relevant. You'll still have all the debates about like how should you spell this API, and like what should its like is it reasonable to add X, Y, and Z, and like is it going to be really supportable across all these vendors? But I think all of that's in the shadow of the question of relevance. And so if we think about these as a means to an end, hopefully that can inform why we should do some of this work.
I want to actually use that as a jumping off point to relevance from a consumer standpoint. So when PWAs first caught on as a term, there was a lot of buzz and hype, and people were talking about them taking over native applications, even replacing native app stores, right? And it doesn't seem like that's materialized. Is that because, it's just a lack of attention? It's this gap that we're talking about right here. Is it, potentially some browser vendors being, anchors on adopting the latest standards? Or is that perception potentially wrong? Like, what's your diagnosis there? Or first of all, is the diagnosis accurate? What is your sense of the state of PWA progress in the ecosystem? Maybe in terms of this graph or otherwise. And then at large, what would you say to somebody that's like, PWAs don't seem as big as they were 4 or 5 years ago?
I'd like to situate that a little bit in history.
Yeah.
So when we initially launched PWA support in Chrome for Android, not for Chrome for desktop, and then we're quickly followed by Firefox and Opera, launching support in their mobile browsers. We were focused heavily on that kind of mobile story about applications, and I'll admit some potential disappointment at the fact that we haven't gone and reversed the trend on mobile, sort of away from the web. And you mentioned some of the factors that play to that. We can talk more about them in a bit. But I will say that what's fascinating to me is the way in which, we always thought about this as like the web being perfect for your top of funnel. Like if you think about you're building a service, you'd like to get it in front of users. You have some set of users who are occasional users. And so for things like, informational sites for governments, the sorts of things that, you're working on at Gov UK, Francis, those experiences they're low interaction depth. Like you don't live in them, you don't go back to them frequently. The front page is a search engine, not the front page of the site. People get to them, they get in, they want to get out. And there's a whole series of other services where the interaction depths are very deep for someone at the bottom of the funnel, right? Like it can actually maybe you don't have a very high angle of attack on the funnel. Maybe it's actually relatively few users, but they're all very deep users. And for the users who live inside of an experience, you want to meet that experience where it is. The web on desktop is killing it, absolutely continuing to do that sort of catch-up thing that we saw in that graph, that sort of stylized story about some facts. And, it's kind of gone K-shaped, where on desktop, the web started, back when we were doing this work 10 years ago, starting this work, was doing okay. It was definitely a very popular application on desktop operating systems, and that has only accelerated. The web is now, browsers are the most used applications on desktop OSs. Our friends at Intel reported to us that a very large fraction of, larger than you might think, of all CPU cycles on desktops are spent running Chromium of one version or another, variety or another, and that's all web content. So the web is doing great there. And it continues to slide on mobile. And so there's a lot of factors that go into that. But the question of are we there is really, I think, a question of table stakes and then momentum. And so we have the table stakes on desktop, we have momentum. And if you look around, I don't know if you caught this, but some work that my old team, the Fugu team, which is a partnership between Microsoft and Google and Intel and Samsung and others, we've been putting in a lot of work to expand the capabilities of the platform. That's allowed applications like Photoshop to finally come to the web. Adobe announced that at Adobe Max last week. They also announced a suite of other products that are coming to the web. And that kind of thing I think if you had said to someone, a decade ago, "Hey, by the way, Photoshop is coming to the web," they would have actually laughed at you. Right? And so yeah, we're I don't want to say we're eating natives lunch, but it is the case that when you are minimally capable, the model advantage of having incredible reach, like this UI that you see in the screenshot, like this is built using web components, this is built using WebAssembly with WebAssembly threading. This is Adobe's real Photoshop engine, that 25-year-old code base actually running on the web now. That's kind of incredible, and it sort of took the entire platform upgrading to get there. And you really have to have that whole package of features or capabilities available to unlock the value of an application's sort of end-to-end thing. And so there's an open question on mobile, like, do we actually have enough access? Is it broad enough? Is it on all the operating systems and platforms you care about? And so you mentioned earlier, like, what's going on with maybe iOS. We are blocked right now from delivering a capable enough web to meet developers where they want to go, and discovery is also blocked. So, I don't think that that's maybe the only reason that we're not a competitive platform on desktop and sort of eating new use cases as they sort of should fall as commodity over time and adding that portability. But that's that's the story that you want to engineer as a platform vendor.
Yeah, and sometimes we talk about it like. Unsurprisingly, we talk about it around the house quite a lot, and I don't know that we ever thought PWAs would like take over the app stores or anything, but we certainly wanted them to be in that space because we knew that's where so many users were finding their experiences. But what we also talk about is it might not be progressive web apps that is the be all and end all that saves the web, but if we don't save the web, what do we get left with? We get left with an ecosystem of proprietary software in spaces that are entirely controlled by private entities. And that this is why we essentially keep pushing on this problem, because if we lose the web, we lose a certain amount of sort of democratic access to these services. So that's the thing we really try to keep in mind. Progressive web apps might not be the thing. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't take over the app store, that's fine. But something has to, if we care about the web, something has to keep pushing.
It kind of because we have to, because there's no other better.
Yeah, the alternative is a horror show. Yeah. In terms of technology, in my opinion,
it's back to walled gardens.
Absolutely.
And so I guess, and in defense of PWAs, there was the PWA summit recently, and I'll just bring up some stats that were shown there. I was surprised, 1.5 million websites may be installable. On home screens. I was actually really surprised by 20% of page loads are controlled by service workers. That's 1 in 5. That's pretty phenomenal. Maybe it might help if we just redefine what do you think success is for PWAs in the next, 24 months or 2 to 3 years. What would you say? Or 5 years, or pick the timeline. What does success look like? If people extrapolated too much and said, hey, let's do PWA app stores. And I actually tried to build the equivalent of a web app store before the app store existed. And I had people coming to me when PWAs were starting to become popular, and they're like, now is the time. And I didn't quite feel like it was there for a variety of reasons. But like, what does success look like for PWAs? Or are we in like a PWA winter right now and you think it's going to break? And what can people do to help maybe break any obstacles?
I mean, if this is winter, I can't wait for spring. If you go back to that core platform loop diagram, quickly, this is my mental model for how people make sort of investment choices in a platform, right? Like, we can add stuff to the platform, and that may enable developers to build services. Those services are what attract users, and so it is. You don't want to call it a confidence game, but you actually have to build confidence with developers about being able to reach users where they are, and reach those users with a service that is effective and sort of meets their needs, and then does all the stuff that a meta platform should do for you, like lowering the costs, increasing your reach, increasing your pace, your ability to deliver, not having as many gatekeepers. All those things should become available to you on the other side of being, giving up some end-to-end, potential capability, that delta at the very top end of where all the press is always focused, you give pieces of that up, but what you get for it, hopefully, is a structural advantage in learning rate, in deployment rate, in safety, right? Because the reason that the web can work in all these other environments is because we sandbox it so heavily and we make sure that it's safe for you.
So I think I get what you're saying in terms of the dynamics of how the ecosystem gets shaped. Let's try to make this really concrete for like the audience. Should developers just say, I'm not going to build for native? Should they be filing radar bugs? What call to action could we give them concretely to bend the curve here? And then again, if you do have a sense of what success looks like in 5 years, how would you define it?
So on desktop, I think we are in a success state,
Okay.
like,
yeah, no, I'd agree. I mean,
yeah.
The Photoshop is a great example.
And it's not alone, right? Like,
Yeah.
Autodesk brought AutoCAD to the web, SketchUp, like a bunch of these 3D applications you would have never thought, like, should be. YouTube is a PWA on desktop. If you just load it up in Edge or Chrome now, you'll be able to install it and get back to it. That's how I use it. Stadia, the game streaming revolution is happening on mobile right now, right? Like, those are all, massive success stories, and they have.
Alex is giving you the politician's answer. You're giving the success stories, but I think it's worth noting that, like, right now people spend a lot of time and money building native apps.
That's right.
Right?
Where there may not be an ROI. Like, there's app fatigue.
That's right.
And you don't have the distribution advantages. You don't have all the things you were just talking about, Alex. You can't deploy as quickly. You don't have the good learning rate. But how does me as a solo developer, I don't feel like I have a lot of power. How do I bend the curve? Either joint, how do folks actually navigate this?
I personally would love to see more developers make more noise about Apple.
Okay.
I want to hear them say that they want to see these features in the Apple ecosystem, either on iOS or OS X. Like, I want them to ask for browser diversity, engine diversity. I want them to, really, really, I hate to say it, but kind of, maybe it's time to sort of, step away from some of the Mac ecosystem and stop maybe using the tools that are also cutting off part of your business.
So you talked about, sorry to interrupt, but you talked about browser diversity.
Yeah.
Do you, if you want to just
engine
elaborate?
Diversity.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think people really understand that. Do you want to just elaborate? And
yeah, I mean, I'll do the short one, and then Alex can do the longer one if I get it wrong. But essentially, on iOS, you can go to the App Store and download Firefox or Chrome alongside Safari. But the truth is, they're all just shells around Safari's Gecko engine. You don't get Chromium. You don't get a different engine there. They are controlling entirely what runs on that device. So if there is a new feature in Chromium, Blink, for, I don't know, notifications or offline or whatever the feature might be, iOS simply doesn't get it. It just won't get it. And you can't choose to have a different engine there by downloading a different browser. They have said, no thank you.
Yeah, to make that really concrete for the listener, now we are recording this without any native applications. We're using a browser-based, screencast podcast recording software. And we didn't have to download, none of us had to download any software. We just loaded up a browser and we were able to hold this session. That's thanks to features that are in that browser engine, which is in this case Chrome. But, on another platform, in the case of iOS, like you can't just say load up Chrome. You won't get that Chrome feature.
That's
because
right.
it's in
not
the
really
engine.
Chrome.
It's not really.
It's not really Chrome.
It's that, and that's what this cartoon is really about. That under the hood, they have different names on the surface, and you think you might be downloading Chrome, but it's not the same feature set. You won't get the same feature support.
So I'd love. So as a call to action, I'd love to hear developers make a lot more noise about this. And if you now know that and are unhappy about that, I think you should be saying so.
What does noise look like? Is it radar bugs? Is it blog posts? Is it tweets?
Yes.
Is it yeah?
I mean,
including talking to your local elected representatives. There is a moment happening now where, at least in my experience, it has been rare to see regulators starting to even ask questions in this area, and they're starting to. So getting in touch with folks at the local office for your MEP or your senator can make a difference. especially if you have found yourself on the wrong side of some of these, feature gaps that, because of the monoculture that Apple has created on iOS specifically, you can't even work around, right? Like the worst example of this, which is what I had to update this blog post with, which was, Apple breaking storage, just like breaking storage, basically for everybody on IndexedDB, which is the only kind of real option there across all browsers on iOS for a full release. You couldn't go, like, even if you're using Firefox or using Chrome on iOS or Edge, it wouldn't matter because it was broken for everyone structurally because of this underlying monoculture. Obviously, that has downstream side effects for all sorts of quality issues, including security. But it is worse when it comes to the diminution of choice that developers have and the kind of structural tamping down of expectations that users have as a result of that about the web, what the web can do. As a result, specifically of Apple's only successful operating system, not allowing real engine choice, which is...
What do you think... Sorry to interrupt. What do you think the argument is for disallowing engine choice? Is it a security? Is it what do you think the motivation is there to be, why have that restriction?
So I've got like a classic 6,000 word blog post on this. but
I'll pull it up, yeah.
The TLDR is you can come up with a lot, like I'm a browser engineer. I don't know everything about browsers. They're too big for anyone to know everything. Maybe Darren Fisher knows everything. But it's really hard to kind of, because they're small operating systems. So it's hard to keep all these arguments in your head. Apple has only made a few arguments. They've only made them, I think, glancingly and only under duress. And again, it's worth noting that this is the only operating system, including Chrome OS, where you cannot install another browser with its own engine. Like Chrome OS, Chrome is on the name. You can install, full fat Edge and Firefox out of the App Store.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. Yeah. Okay.
Firefox runs with Gecko. It runs at full speed. The whole deal. So the only place where web developers have no recourse and users have no recourse is iOS. And Apple is happy to argue in court, it seems, that it is reasonable for web developers to take their business to the web if they don't like Apple's store policies. Except what they fail to mention is that Apple has structurally hobbled all of those features. So, if you can't send push notifications and you're a communications application or you're a chat application, like, does your thing exist? Is it reasonable? No, we can have a long debate about whether or not you should have push notifications. But I will just
I was going to say push notifications is the one where, like, as a user, I'm not sure I want every website to be able to.
And you can imagine operating systems doing all sorts of things to attenuate it. But it's also worth noting that when you install a native application from the iOS App Store, you can have push notifications.
Yeah.
So the question is not whether or not a feature is desirable. It's whether or not you can achieve equality about things that are truly commodity features. And so it should be the operating system's business to attenuate the worst outcomes of potential abuse of APIs and tamp down on them. Like, there's a big job to be done there for all operating systems to, like, I don't know, sort your push notifications or do a better job of this. But, like, if you're going to facilitate developers on the one hand and then argue in court that it's fine for you to have this other choice on the other, but then not provide parity in terms of capability, you sort of have to ask what's underneath it. And so in that blog post, I go into a bunch of the other arguments that are made, mostly around security. And I know something about a little bit about security and a lot about how browsers work. And the security professionals that I ran that blog post by were actually kind of astonished that I was so generous to Apple's case in that post. They were pushing me to be much more strident because from their perspective, it's just bullshit. It's just straight up bullshit. There's no colorable, defensible case that you could make that this is net better. And it's frustrating because the security details are so in the weeds, right? It's and the status quo is unclear, right? The status quo is that you can make a browser on iOS that enables all the sorts of attacks that Apple will, on the one hand, potentially, or their defenders will argue would be so bad because you can make a communication channel between the browser process and the renderer process. That one of them is in a stronger jail than the other one. You can provide access to all of that privilege sensitive user data. You can actually get access to a lot of the network traffic. Things that the current shape of the restrictions would make you believe shouldn't be possible. A lot of those attacks are possible. And so even the fact that the status quo is as bad as it is, from the perspective of the argument that gets raised, isn't something that is legible to most people. Like the fact of how deep the bullshit is something that we're so mired in that you can't even get your head above it to see. It's so bad.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't even include the side of the story that's about Apple's desire to control a marketplace, just straight up, right? They're not only do they make a lot of money from app installs, but they're also taking a huge cut from anything sold in an app from an app store. See the Fortnite lawsuit, right?
Yeah, they have a financial.
There's a lot of incentives to not play
Apple's
nicely.
not all one person, but clearly organizationally they have it.
Organizationally, they have a particular set of incentives that are unfortunately against having a more open web experience, I think.
And I just want to say, browsers are a serious business. Doing a bad job about a browser can put users at deep risk, right? That is the backdrop to all of this debate. And so it is important that we encourage folks to build credible, secure, fast updating browsers that respond to security issues quickly, that have good designs, that take into account all those kinds of long-term quality concerns. And at the same time, the set of policy options that are available to Apple to encourage or if this is a problem to be solved, not a question to be stamped out, the set of policy options that are available are legion, right? You can do so much without opening the floodgates to terrible outcomes per se, and provide more diversity inside that ecosystem, so that the next time I don't know what was that big attack against the U.S. government earlier in the year?
The oil line one, the oil pipeline one.
Yeah, there was an attack against some sandboxing in the SolarWinds environment, and no one could actually do anything about it because they couldn't replace the engine. They couldn't go to a browser with a different engine in it, even if they were using a different browser on iOS.
So I want to actually pause us there on that topic for time, because I want to get to yet another, just as controversial topic, and that's framework choice that is near and dear to developers. And because you've been also equally vocal about this, especially you, Alex. So I just want to put up, some of the tweets you've shared, especially React in particular, and I'll just got a few. React communities, norms, and practices are a disaster. You're in the guts. You're in the guts of the browser, and you're looking at the stack traces, and you're seeing issues typically with React. Applications. React seems poorly understood by those using it, and it prevents developers from seeing or addressing issues. Should you use React at all in 2021? The answer is no. I guess first off, can you explain the issue you see with React? And I'll say this having been I'm actually a bit of curmudgeon-y plain old JavaScript, but of the modern frameworks, the one I most program in is React. What's the issue here with React? I think in this one, you also mentioned Next. What's the issue there? And then what do you recommend people do?
So I want to start by saying, all of this comes from, as you say, so in the PWA journey, one of the things that if you step back, the whole goal is to get people to a place where the experiences that they're having on the web, particularly the mobile web, are competitive, right? That these feel good, that they meet the basic, experiential expectations of end users. And so I want to step back and say, why is it that we adopted frameworks? And the hope is, on the one hand, that they give us a way of, conceiving of our work that is this is not, every potential degree of freedom all at once. That they give us a way to structure it so that the results are better over time. And the results are better for who? Well, hopefully it's the end user. You kind of want to ensure that the end user's experience is actually being improved. And so React is now the problem child, absolutely. And it's not, some canny people will say, oh, well, it's not React the framework that's the problem. Like it's only like 45K or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's true. It didn't be the case that we could really afford that easily. The hardware and network world has moved on a little bit, which is great, actually. I've been, sort of deeply in touch with the performance inequality gap on this front for a bunch of years now. And so while it was the case that like, if you're going to take a legacy desktop focused framework, and it didn't really matter which one, if you started with Ember, if you started with Angular, if you started with React, you were going to be in trouble. And then that showed up all over the place. Like that, you basically had to be one of that rarefied small group of developers who could take it apart and put it back together blindfolded in order to be able to use them well enough to really hit those hard targets. The good news is that in 2021, the targets have relaxed a little bit, even at the low end. So we're in a position now where, you can do kind of okay at the low end on something like maybe 0.5 megabyte total transfer for initial load, and a little bit less if it's mostly JavaScript. That's a lot, and that means that the cost of a framework may only be 10%, and that's a pretty serious tax rate, but it's not going to kill you. So what's going on with React? Well, it's cultural. It's a framework that came from the desktop era and has assumed desktop limits and constraints sort of the whole time. And as a result, the set of things that people pull along with it and the way that people are encouraged to build doesn't actually meet the way even Facebook uses React. Like, so, like the one tweet you didn't pull up was the one where I sort of outline kind of how you would use it if you were using it the way that its progenitor organization uses it, which is to say there's a fully staffed performance team, there's go, no-go cuts based on performance metrics, there's key metrics the whole way, and you can afford to build it 3 times. You can build a super light mobile version, and then a light mobile version, and then a regular mobile version, and then a desktop version, right?
Basically, they have a much larger team. They have a different set of problems and constraints than your whatever team.
Oh, and they have a machine learning system to optimize the bundles. Like, do you have a machine learning system that's optimizing your bundles for deployment and choosing to shunt users to one experience versus the other based on their device and connection type? And if the answer is no, then maybe you probably should use something that starts a little bit lighter weight, because that's what's gonna help you. Because if the thing that's being sold is, you can use this and it's going to make your experiences great. And if the reality is it's going to make this slice of your experiences great and the other one's going to suffer greatly and you aren't controlling for that, well, then you aren't kind of doing the thing, You're on a different track entirely. And so where the developer ecosystem is right now, I'm seeing lots of green shoots, reasons to be optimistic, things like Astro, Vite, and maybe even the React Server components.
Yeah, do you think React Server components are going to help with this?
I'm waiting with bated breath to see a trace that is not a disaster. Like, send me the traces and we'll talk, right? Like, that's always the way this works, is that the truth is in the trace. And so I'm hopeful, I'm cautiously optimistic that we will get to a place where people will sequester their JavaScript load to CPUs on the server that can actually run it and handle it and like deal with, the IO and the latency and the compute tax that comes with doing everything several times more than you need to. But on the client side, look, we can't afford this. If we want to compete, if we
performance-wise, I want to just underscore, for performance-wise, you mean we can't afford this? Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. But that turns into a team-level experience too, right? And the thing that really gets me agitated is watching teams get into this like spiral of defeat, where they had the old thing and they replaced it with a brand new shiny thing, and oh my god, it's tanking all these business metrics, and then it's months and months and months of remediation that's so painful, whether it's like a CEO or CMO breathing down your neck about like, why are like sales down just before the holidays, and oh my god, we're going to lose all this money, and no one is allowed to talk about this experience. Like, our culture in tech will not allow anyone to say, there's no like, I went through the 6-month remediation tour badge that anyone wears, because that would be admitting defeat. And so we are sitting in an environment where lots of teams are suffering. sometimes that turns into like a full flush, like the team gets fired, right? Like, oh, they did this whole thing. And then that's more expensive yet again. And so I want to see teams succeed, and I want to see them succeed on the web in the long run. And to do that, they're going to need to change the way they approach this. Will that involve React? Maybe, but it can't involve the architectures that we're currently sort of leaning into to make this work, given the constraints within the CPU and the disk that we're targeting, right? Like, if you look at this device that we just launched, yesterday, 2 days ago, the Surface Laptop SE. It's a Celeron device. The low end SKU is a N4020. That's 2 cores. Starts at 1 gigahertz, ramps all the way up to 2. It's got 4 megabytes of cache. That's like a world better than the low end mobile CPUs that I used to still go on about.
Yeah.
But it's not enough to handle the desktop loads that we're throwing at this, that people are building in this style and on these stacks. So like, if you're taking the canonical, GraphQL with Apollo plus React and React style components, inlining all of your SVG and your like stuff into this thing, and then like pulling in a copy of Core.js, and then pulling in a copy of Lodash, and then pulling in like 60 copies of polyfills for browsers that have long since gone extinct. You're just not on track to do a good job for the end user, and then everyone has to get defensive, and that's bad for teams. And I care about that long-term experience for teams on the web. I don't want them to have to think, oh, well, I have to build this in some native framework too because it's not good enough.
So
that's the risk, isn't it?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that's the risk. You have these CAOs or CMOs wigging down developers' necks, and maybe they also already have a native app, and they see a disparity in the productivity or the performance between these two experiences. And if they've had a bad sort of go at the web version because of a framework to let them down a different, maybe an incorrect garden path, they may have lost their one shot to really prove the web can do what it can do when it's handled correctly. So it's a big risk, in a sort of like in the macro sense for the web when these bad experiences get out into the world.
Yeah, the success of the web is almost at stake, not just the success of
your
project.
And it sounds sort of super alarmist, but I am a bit alarmist about it. I do worry that we're blowing our opportunities here.
So, maybe I'll just close with this question. Like, what do you recommend teams adopt as an alternative to React?
Performance budgets.
Okay,
right?
So not another framework, just making sure they have performance budgets.
Okay. So what I see right now in practice is a lot of teams will, like, there's a lot of like covariance going on in ways that are not necessarily dispositive. So choosing Preact over React does not like give you superpowers. But it is indicative of a series of choices that you are likely to make all the way through your development process that places a concern in the sort of stack rank of hierarchies a little bit higher about the end user experience, especially at the margin. So if you are going to include stories about marginal users, and I mean marginal users in the sense of like people at the P75 plus, P90, P95, P99, if you're going to include those users in your product story, then you have to include them in your choice making about technology as well, and the way that you manage that technology. So what I preach isn't not React, it's not this culture. Not this culture that says it's the developer's experience that is most important. I want to preach that it is most important for end users to be getting the right end of this deal, because it is on their success that the rest of us have, a job and a next gig and a web that is growing rather than shrinking.
Let me try and rephrase what I think you just said, which is that when you write user stories for features, one of those features needs to be the performance of the experience, just as much as any other feature you add to it.
If you think about, like, people talk about accessibility, and like, I think about the first word of accessibility is just access.
Yeah.
If I'm a user and I can't access this thing because it's too slow, then like, you've just defeated everything else about the experience.
It's the foundation.
It is very much the foundation. And so if the foundation is rotten or it's built on sand, you're going to get yourself into trouble. You're going to get your team into trouble. It's going to be bad. And it's going to come back at you in ways that you didn't intend. No one goes to work thinking they're going to do a bad job today. They get sold a lot of tools. A lot of those tools promise to make things fast. And those tools right now are being marketed in ways that I think are, how can I say this politely? We need to see a lot more truth in the trace rather than arguments about why something could, in theory, be fast.
Got it.
Yeah. They promise a lot. They certainly do. And I don't blame anyone who wants to use them, especially when companies are asking for those skills.
Yeah.
But I think we need to sort of be a little bit more critical, and I I make my living caring about what the users want, and I think that's the where the buck stops.
So as they said in Tron, I fight for the user. Yeah.
And if you've confused the user, if you think that the user is the developer, your entire value system is wrong. And I mean that like very fundamentally. Like you're on the wrong track and you're going to do harm. So reconsider.
Interesting. There's a whole thread we could go down. Like you're making me think about AMP, which was very clearly user first and developer second. But we're actually out of time.
Oh my gosh, we could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, that
I disagree with that statement alone.
Yeah, no, we should. If you've got your bingo card, I usually bring up AMP. We can probably guys have you back on that debate. But in closing, just where should folks find you guys on social media and hear more? Just give us pointers where to follow these discussions.
I'm not much of a tech blogger anymore, but my website is fberriman.com, and I'm on Twitter as Faye. That's PHAE. So you can find me there.
My blog is at infrequently.org, and as the name will alert you to, the posts are not very often, but they're long. I make up for it in length. And I'm on Twitter at Slightly Late, although I don't necessarily recommend following me there.
You make up for it on Twitter. I cannot keep up. All the tweets I just showed were right now during the interview that he sent out. He's just very prolific. It is entertaining. I'll say that. Well, Alex and Frances, it was really great to have you. Thank you for joining us in JavaScript Jam. And look forward to maybe having that AMP discussion sometime down the road.
maybe over a drink though. Right?
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.